Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson on European society in the age of the Renaissance. This is part one of a few different video lessons, and my name is Miss Jennifer Blank. I will be your guide on this journey. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so the key topics we're going to talk about in this series of video lessons are characteristics of the Italian Renaissance, Renaissance society, the Italian states, the intellectual Renaissance, art in the Renaissance, European states in the Renaissance, you're noticing a theme here, and finally, the church. In this particular video lesson, in part one, we're going to focus on the first three bullet points: characteristics, society, and the Italian states. So, the Renaissance, roughly, in terms of time period, was from 1350 to 1550. Now, if you Google this, you will see a number of different date ranges. You'll see 1300 to 1500, 1300 to 1600, and so on and so forth. All of those are correct, and I know that's not what students want to hear, but what do I have to put on the exam? Generally speaking, historians do their best to try to specify an end or beginning date, but these are artificial demarcations. For my purposes, I'm going to work with 1350 to 1550, and I just want to let you know that you're going to see other dates other date ranges that might pop up. So, what does it literally mean? It means rebirth of Greco-Roman civilization, and that literally a rebirth of this. Now, Greece and Rome were very important, very advanced ancient civilizations. And between the fall of Rome and the start of the Renaissance, you have this period of dark ages, of the Middle Ages, where all of this knowledge was lost. All right, nobody was looking at this, nobody was studying this. This was not a major important thing. And at the start of the Renaissance, people started rediscovering this stuff, and they were like, wait, this is good times, this is great, we like this stuff. So there was a revival of Greco-Roman culture. So that everything from intellectual thought to art to political theory, everything, the whole nine yards. Now, this guy, Jacob Burckhardt, he's a historian. He created the modern concept of the Renaissance, but many recent historians have come out and said, well, you know, he had really way too much emphasis on secularism, which is non-religious, and individualism. The Renaissance was not anti-God. It was pro-human, and it was anti-church in many cases, but not anti-God. This is very, very important, and students confuse this a lot with this break from the control of the medieval church to like, oh, we don't care about the church at all. No, not quite. It was a lot more nuanced than that. The big thing here is the emphasis on humanity. That takes precedence over the church and over faith-based initiatives. It was an urban movement, all right? This was not happening in rural society. This was happening in the cities. It was an age of recovery. We had trade recover, manufacturing recover, the economy recovered, population recovered. So it was an age of recovery. People were feeling very positive about things. And there was this distinct emphasis on human ability and human achievement. Now, what is that the definition of? I know that you guys know what this means. In case you don't, it's humanism. I already mentioned it. It's very important. It's also important to know this was an upper class movement. If you were to go back in time to the Renaissance and ask a random peasant, you know, hey, do you know about the Renaissance? They're going to be like, what? They have no idea what you're talking about, because this was an upper class movement. This was not a movement of everyone. This was a movement, an urban and elite movement specifically. All right, so as I said before, this was an age of recovery. So let's talk about economics for a minute. Manufacturing and trade are booming. Things are really happening in the economic sector in Europe during this time. It's good times. This is great. Now, there was the Hansa, or the Hanseatic League. That was a military and commercial association formed by coastal towns in North Germany, all right? And they formed this so that they could help protect themselves against bandits and pirates, and also so that they could collaborate and make more money and make sure that they weren't undercutting each other. It began its decline in the 15th century. This was largely a medieval invention, but it did play a role during the latter part of the 1300s and into the 1400s, so I do want to mention it. The textile industry recovered, so this was important. Luxury textiles boomed. This will help drive the age of exploration that we'll talk about in a couple of units, so this is important to note that the textile industry recovered. New industries were developed. Printing, the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, that's my man, dude. That guy was awesome. He single-handedly revolutionized how people received and had access to information during this era. The Renaissance and later the Protestant Reformation would not have been possible without this new industry of printing being developed. Mining was very important. And in tandem with that is metallurgy. Metallurgy is the act of drawing out precious metals from ore. All right, so it's actually taking those metals out of the rock and being able to do something with it. And because people figured out how to do that very, very efficiently, very, very well, that drove mining to continue. Now, banking in Florence. Huge. As I say here, this is a BFD. That stands for big freaking deal. Means it's very, very important. Now, you have to think about, like, now we take for granted. You know, we have ATMs everywhere, and I can log on to my bank right now, and I can see what's in my account, and, you know, it's all very exciting. It's instant access, right? But back in the day, you know, you didn't have any of that. You know, you didn't have, you know, automobiles, trains, and all that stuff. You know, none of the internet. But this guy, Lorenzo de' Medici, and his family, they helped create this banking system and started in Florence. But for example, like, you could be in London, and you're like, I want to deposit, make a deposit, and they're like, okay, great, so we'll take this deposit, and they give you this little slip, you know, and then you could, like, go to Florence and a month later and be like, hey, I'd like my money, and your money is there, which is like, whoa, that's intense. That's crazy. That was revolutionary. The idea that you didn't have to travel with all of your belongings, that you could send them on and they would be safe waiting for you when you got to your future destination. So that was very important. Banking is key. All right, so let's talk nobility. All right. Now, this guy that you see over here, that guy is Baldassare Castiglione. All right. And he's really important. He wrote the Book of the Courtier, which is basically a how-to guide of being a noble. It was, I mean, detailed everything from how to dress, how to eat, things to say, you know, what to do with your forks. I mean, he really bottom line the how-to of how to be the best noble you possibly could be. Now, AP children, I can virtually guarantee that this guy's going to show up on the AP exam in some form or another, so you should pay attention and study this guy. Now, the nobility generally, they dominated everybody, all right? They held all the military and political posts. They had access to education. Knowledge is power, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's cliche, but it's true. They had access to knowledge, and because they had that access that other people did not, they were a cut above everybody else. Now, nobles, this idea, they had to serve their leader effectively and honestly, their leader being the king. And during this era, you start to get the development of the modern nation state, this idea of centralization of political authority. And so this idea of nobles serving their leader becomes more and more important. Peasants and townspeople were composed of several different groups. You have the patricians, the petty burghers, the wage workers without property, and the unemployed. All right, so these are basically your peasant class, your lower classes, and then this is nobility right here. So it's very important stuff. Okay, slavery. Slavery was a thing. It's more of a big deal in the New World, and that's more of a U.S. history thing. But slavery was a thing in Europe. The slave trade boomed for a while, but right towards about the middle of the Renaissance, you know, end of the beginning, it starts to die out. It dies out in the 15th century. So it did boom for a bit, but then it died out. The family was key. Family was important. Now, don't just think of this as the nuclear family with the mom, dad, couple of kids, family dog, picket fence. That didn't exist then, but anyway. It includes parents, children, grandparents, widowed mothers, unmarried sisters. So you're not just talking about the nuclear family. You're talking about the extended family. All right. Old family names were good times. Now, as you see, speaking of social change, as you see the rise of the merchant class, these people who were engaging in a lot of trade and shipping and making money doing all this stuff, that for lack of a better comparison, it's kind of like middle class. That was the merchant class. They lacked the name, but they had the money. But a lot of noble families were running out of cash. So you had old noble families with old names marrying no-named rich merchants. And so that way both families got what they wanted. The merchants got the old family name, and then the nobles got an influx of cash. So that was good times. And this is where you get the concept of not get the concept, but arranged marriages were a big thing here. Actually, this modern idea of we marry for love and I love him, I love her. No. That didn't matter then. Love was immaterial. In many cases, the husband and wife didn't even meet until the wedding, until they were at the altar. Like, oh, hey, what's up? I'm marrying you. How you doing? You know, it was all arranged. And it was in an effort to create political alliances and economic alliances. All right. Remember, Europe was still in a patriarchal system. That's what was being used. Maybe you know what this means. If you don't, I'm going to tell you. It means male-dominated society. So women had very, very little power. There were exceptions to this. Christine de Pizan is an example. She wrote, she was one of the first women published during this era, so she's important. But for the most part, this was male-dominated. Women didn't have much say at all. All right, so the Italian states. Now, they're independent city-states that were smaller, like these guys, and we don't care about we care about them, but they're not as important. I don't foresee people like that showing up on the AP exam. But the ones we do need to know about are these guys, the 5 major states. Count them. 5. Milan, Venice, Florence, the Papal States, and Naples. You are going to need to know about these states. In class, we will discuss and examine each of these states in due course in much more detail. But you need to memorize those 5 major states. It's very important. All right, warfare. This was key. The goal was to balance power. All right. The goal was not to have, and this is with the Italian states, the goal was not to have any one state have too much power over the other states. You wanted to balance the power, relatively speaking, an equal amount of power. It was designed to prevent the aggrandizement of any one state at the expense of the others. And aggrandizement means to make greater. Okay. So prevent making one state greater than the others, right? So the Peace of Lodi was important, and it stopped 50 years of unremitting war, okay? This was very important because once you stop war, once you stop worrying about fighting and duking it out with your next door neighbor, you can focus on things like trade and intellectual development and patronizing the arts, and that's all good stuff. Now, there were also powerful monarchies. Italy, I want you to remember, was the battleground for France and Spain. France and Spain at this point are duking it out for control, trying to figure out who's going to top who. Let me spare you the suspense. Spain wins, but that's for another presentation. Regional loyalty as opposed to national loyalty at this point. So the modern nation state comes later, but this is the start of this because people start to develop regional loyalty. National loyalty comes later. Regional loyalty is the stepping stone necessary to have national loyalty, which allows the modern nation state to develop a little bit later on in the Renaissance. But it does happen in the Renaissance. All right, modern diplomacy. This was a product of the Italian Renaissance. All right, so you see, Secretary of States, and you see all of the ambassadors and all this stuff. A lot of what we do diplomatically, even now, comes from the traditions and customs that were set up during the Italian Renaissance. Now, during this time, there's a change in the concept of an ambassador. Okay, now in the Middle Ages, that's what MA stands for, Middle Ages. Everything was done for the sake of the church. You were an ambassador from your country to another, but it didn't matter, your country, whatever, the church, all that matters is the church. In the Renaissance, that shifts significantly. Everything is now for the sake of the state, okay? And this is what allows this is also what allows the centralization of political authority to happen, because now the people who are going out into the world and speaking for the state are in fact representing the interests of that state, not the interests of the church, all right? And this is an important thing to know. Interests of the state take precedence over all other things. This is a central idea that needed to happen in order for the modern nation state to develop. Machiavelli. We love Machiavelli. Well, we love him and we hate him because he had some very interesting ideas, but he was a very important diplomat. He did write The Prince in 1513, and we're going to read some excerpts of that. To get on the Medici's good side, he actually serviced the family that kicked out the Medici, and then so he was trying to get, when Lorenzo comes in, he was trying to get back in Lorenzo's good graces, kind of get back in Italy. Didn't work out for him, but what are you going to do? He wrote this specifically for Lorenzo. All right, now let's take a look at some excerpts from The Prince. I'm going to just read this to you. Follow along with me. Upon this, a question arises, whether it be better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved. It may be answered that one should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, is much safer to be feared than loved, when of the two either must be dispensed with. Because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children, as is said above, when the need is far distant. But when it approaches, they turn against you. So I want you to contemplate that for a minute. Sit and think about this. My folks, we're going to be discussing this in class, its significance, and what all of this means. Here's another quote from Machiavelli. Feel free to pause it and read it on your own. That is the end of our presentation. I will see you on the flip side in part 2.